Church of Mabus. Metaphysical. The dark side.
Haunted houses, I like anything horror, all of it. Oh yeah, me like it. You mean I could go mad? I'm shaking.
The Church of Mabus.
I'm stoked. I'm ready. This is awesome.
Welcome back to the Church of Mabus radio show. Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's Friday evening. What time is it? It's 6:09 p.m. Central Time. Let me sit in my chair here and find the stuff I'm supposed to say. You're listening to 107.7 New Orleans and 105.3 Henderson Point, Mississippi. And a shout out to our sponsor, QualityLiquorStore.com in San Diego, California. That's QualityLiquorStore.com in San Diego, California. What's up, Beazle? Beazle's back with us.
Yeah, it's been about a month since I've been on, so it's good to be back. I can say that currently I'm not happy with Skype, and I'm on my phone, so hopefully I don't get dropped or something.
Yeah, if you get dropped, we'll just call you back, hopefully quickly, and get you back on the mothership, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, if I get lost in time and space, you might have to go fishing and pull me out of the vortex.
That's right, because we're dancing in a black hole, and all we want to do is rock and roll.
Most of the time. Yeah.
I'm about to watch Godzilla for the first time. Pretty excited.
Yeah, I still haven't seen it. I'm a huge Godzilla fan. Like I'm a North American-sized Godzilla fan.
Godzilla. I haven't seen it yet. I also want to see the new Planet of the Apes and Guardians of the Galaxy. Those are both supposed to have great reviews.
Yeah.
I didn't realize Guardians of the Galaxy was by the dude that did Slither, which is that crazy horror movie with all the like tentacle crazy.
I have it on my bookshelf or on my movie shelf right now. So.
Yeah, that's a good one. And he also did Super, that one about the superhero with Kevin Bacon and Liv Tyler and all that. That's really good.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I'm excited about Guardians of the Galaxy also. I'm supposed to take my wife to see that on her birthday on Sunday. And I guess some people have said that it's kind of like it reminded them of how they felt when the first time they saw Star Wars, because it was such an excellent space movie.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen it yet. And I didn't follow the comics too much. But I guess they're trying to tie it in with the Avengers and all that. So
Did you say for your birthday Sunday?
For my wife's birthday Sunday.
Oh, happy birthday to your wife.
Indeed.
Happy birthday to your wife. My girlfriend's birthday Sunday.
Are you serious?
Serious.
Well, that's cool.
She's coming here, and I have to watch that No Fault Stars movie, and I'm probably going to kill myself during it.
Yeah. We should all move in together because then it would be cheaper to buy weed.
Yeah, there's got to be some cheaper weed somewhere on another state. But yeah, on the break we were talking about in Florida, they're going to be passing medicinal marijuana hopefully in November. And right now all these small-time little redneck sheriffs and stuff are having these rallies, and they're like, vote no against medicinal marijuana, it's the devil.
It's the devil.
Republican, right-wing, conservative, crazy sheriffs and stuff, they're doing their little rallies against it and all that because they don't want to stop all that money they're making from confiscating cars and houses and God knows what else.
Putting people in prison and
that cash flow. But anyway, I hope and they all cry.
Right, yeah. It would be nice to see them cry, I guess. But yeah, I mean, hopefully that happens for you guys. I mean, even if I wasn't an advocate of marijuana, I still think an anti-marijuana rally would be pretty much a bummer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that just doesn't sound very fun at all, you know.
It's pretty funny. It's pretty funny.
Right. I think there's probably a lot of yelling and anger and that kind of stuff.
Reefer madness. Did I just hear a cat meow?
Yes, Walter. He locked him outside of the studio and he's angry about it. So.
Nice. Well,
scratch my feet.
We had someone that was possibly going to be on the show. What's her name? Catherine.
The Shakespearean lady?
Yeah, ShakespeareSuppressed.com. She had wanted a possibility with Mark Eddy. We were looking for her to be on the show, and she didn't think our audience was meant for Shakespeare Suppressed. And Mark said it was a UFO Bigfoot audience, which we're not just a UFO Bigfoot audience, Mark Eddy. And anyway,
that's right.
She didn't think it was a fit. Shakespeare was a fit for us, our audience. Like nobody in our audience jives to Shakespeare, apparently.
They're all lowbrow, and it would just be a waste to put it on their minds.
Shakespeare? Who's Shakespeare?
Right. Shakespeare.
So I've been trying to do my Shakespeare lately. It's pretty pathetic.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I don't really get that because I would like to think that our audience is pretty diverse, and I know that it is. And,
yes.
You know, I mean, I don't know what podcast or show on the UFO Paranormal Network is strictly driven towards Shakespeare. You know, I mean, is that what she's looking for? Because it's kind of hard to expose yourself as an artist or anyone if you're just, you know, appealing to the same people over and over again. I mean, why wouldn't she want to enlighten the Church of Mabus radio crowd with some Shakespeare?
She still may do the interview. We'll see. Mark's working on it. We'll see what happens. But withereth hithereth, nay, 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 nay.
Indeed.
Indeed. I like Shakespeare. I've seen all the films. I used to have the book. I never really read them.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I read, we had these big, huge, like, leather-bound volumes that were gigantic, and it had all the plays and all of his work in it, and I read through that stuff. And by the end of it, I didn't like Shakespeare because I read all of it, and it took a long time, and it became really tedious. It's kind of like the same thing with, like, Russian literature for me. Like, it's just so hard to read sometimes because it just goes on and on and on.
Well, her whole thing is Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare. It was someone else. It was some kind of vast conspiracy of Shakespeare suppressed. I don't know.
So there was, like, many Shakespeares or just, like, one Shakespeare and one dude?
It was the Illuminati Kung Fu Jesuit monk reptilian Shakespeare.
Well, was it Hong Kong Phooey? Was he involved?
I don't know.
I'm sure.
I wanted to do the interview. That movie Titus.
Yeah, why not?
I love that Titus movie with Anthony Hopkins. That's some high weirdness. I love that movie. Cannibals and eyes and craziness. Like the coming of the Antichrist, and it's like weird.
There's a lot of that going on, in Shakespeare. There's a lot of murder, treachery, dancing,
sex and death.
Yeah, Oedipus, all that. Everybody wants to bang their mom.
I thought I read somewhere Shakespeare smoked weed and did coke.
That'll make the time go by.
I found it on his body or something. I could have sworn I read a legit article or something like that.
Yeah.
Well,
it's possible.
Anything's possible. All right, our guest tonight's Don Webb. He's the author of Overthrowing the Old Gods, Aleister Crowley and the Book of the Law, and also his new book, Through Dark Angles, works inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. We're going to get into those in just a second. Let me find I just wanted to mention who the guest was next week. I forgot. I have to look at my list.
Who is the guest next week?
I think it's...
That's a good question.
Oh, yeah, I know who it is, but let me look at it because I don't want him to say her name wrong. Let me find it. Where is it?
That would be very un-Shakespearean of you.
Very un-Shakespearean. She's Native American. God, what happened to my guest list? Hold on. Let me go to the...
Her favorite color is purple. She walks on the beaches.
Yeah. Her name's Thunder, but the last name is what
awesome.
I have. She's been on Joe Montaldo's show because that's where I saw her listed at, or heard her. So I decided to get her on. Let me find her. No, her first name isn't Thunder. Devara Thunderbeat. Look up my encounters with ETs and angels. So basically, Native American chick talking about UFOs and aliens and stuff. It's kind of hot too. So hey,
fascinating.
All that goes together quite nicely. All right.
Indeed.
All right. How you doing, Don? Are you there?
I am here, and as always, glad to be with you guys.
The return of Don Webb.
That's right.
The return.
So, yeah.
So,
the return of the revenge.
The revenge. So, Don, if you could, I'd like to talk about, of course, your new book and also your older book.
Okay.
But if you could you tell us a bit about your background and the Temple of Set, just to give the audience a refresher, so to speak, about your origins, so to speak?
Well, I am a writer of science fiction, horror fiction, and fantasy. And some years ago, I joined the Temple of Set. I found its philosophy to be very resonant, very empowering. And I joined in '89. 7 years later, I had become its high priest and held that office for 6 years. I am, of course, still very active within the temple, as you can probably guess from my latest book on Crowley. I am a longtime practitioner of the left-hand path and a teacher of the left-hand path, which, of course, has little to do with conventional sort of diabolism. We're not Satan worshippers.
Right.
It's more interesting to become Satan than to worship Satan. But I also have had a long-standing interest in the fiction of H.P. Lovecraft all my life. Lovecraft had a real call for me, and even some of the first things I ever wrote. And in this latest book from Hippocampus Press, I picked out stuff over a 30-year period and arranged it with the help of S.T. Joshi, who's their editor, kind of the most brilliant Lovecraftian in the world, and have cast this out in the world as a new working both of art and, of course, of magic, because anything a magician does is a magical working, even if it doesn't look that way to someone outside of the magical way of thinking of the universe.
Mm-hmm. So what was the effect that Lovecraft had on you?
Well, Lovecraft, at a very early age, I had two brief encounters with Lovecraftian fiction that completely changed my life. Back in 1967, my brothers, who are much older than me, they're identical twins, had just received the news that they were not going to Vietnam. And man, they were in the best mood I had ever seen them in.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I went into their room, and instead of chasing me out, which they usually did with their young brother, they handed me a copy of a Lovecraftian short story collection called The Color Out of Space. And they discussed whether they thought I was old enough to read it. They had me read a passage, and they asked me a question about it. I thought the question was so easy, I thought it must be a trick. So I answered it in a different way and said, oh, you don't have the vocabulary for this. And they put the book in. Well, that was a huge challenge. So shortly thereafter, I did this very, evil act. I broke into their room and, stole the book and read it. And then a few years later, the local library had a children's section, which of course I was allowed to go in, and an adult section, which children could never. That was the most forbidden thing. Well, I snuck into the adult section because I'm 9 years old. I was really curious. What's going to be the secrets here? And I'm going through the fiction section, and I see this book, again, has the word Lovecraft on it. And I pull it down, and I open it up to the story, Lovecraft's most famous story, The Call of Cthulhu. And in The Call of Cthulhu, there's a Professor Webb that's mentioned. It so happened the page I opened the book to was how Professor Webb had found these degenerate Eskimo in Greenland who worshipped Cthulhu. And it's the first time I'd ever seen my name, my last name in print. And that was like this incredibly personal moment. Like I snuck into the secret place, and I have the forbidden book, and I open the forbidden book, and look, I'm inside the forbidden book. And after that, I was, heroin could not have addicted me more. Now, the problem of this period, which was the late 60s, the early 70s, very little of Lovecraft stuff was in print. During his lifetime, for example, he never managed to attract a book publisher. He sold his stuff mainly through a small magazine called Weird Tales, and you had to go down and buy every issue, religiously to have a collection. And there was a brief love for him in the 60s, and then that went out. And there was a brief love again in the 80s, which was just when I was late 80s, when I started my writing career, and they helped me out. Now, Lovecraft is an amazingly hot topic. Lovecraftian fiction is everywhere. The average person on the street has some idea what Cthulhu is, although they're not really clear. They have some image of like a big octopus.
Saturated.
And so here we've gone from this guy who was so obscure. I mean, even when he was writing for Weird Tales, he was not the most popular writer of Weird Tales. I mean, so people think back, oh, this was the guy. No, he was popular, but he wasn't in, say, the top 2 or 3 writers of Weird Tales. Now there's like a huge, amazing Lovecraft cult. Now, because I am in the Temple of Set, since I want to make a connection between these two things, the founder of the Temple of Set, a man named Michael Aquino. When Michael Aquino was in the Church of Satan, it so happened that Anton LaVey wanted a Lovecraftian ritual. Anton says, look, this devil worship stuff is not that interesting. Let's do something that is really far out. And so they picked this young guy who at that time had just returned from his own stint in Vietnam, trained as a psychological warfare officer, and says, here's your test. Come up with something interesting. And he produced a working called the Bond of the Seven, the Ceremony of the Seven Angles, Ceremony of the Nine Angles, and then also one later called Call to Cthulhu, that were published in the Satanic Rituals back when that came out as Avon paperback. There has always been a there's for a long time been a small group in the Temple of Set called the Order of the Trapezoid, and one of the things they're interested in is neo-mythology, made up fictional patterns. What does that show about human consciousness? And Lovecraft is always ranked really highly. And when I was in the temple, one of the first things I did, I joined the Order of the Trapezoid, and I was even the editor of its newsletter, Runes, for some years. So I'm fascinated with these mythological systems that aren't human-based or human-centric.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, that's a great answer, Don. I mean, I can totally relate to your experience there, in the sense that it was around the 80s when I discovered Lovecraft, probably 1981, 1982, and I was only like 5 years old, and I saw the one of the compendiums of his stories, and it was the artwork, the name Lovecraft. I was reading before I was in kindergarten, that type of thing, but I couldn't comprehend what was going on in these stories at the time, but I would just sit there with the books and with other books and just try to will myself into recognizing anything that I could understand. And so after a period of time, when I was actually able to follow some of the stories, I mean, it had a very similar effect in the sense that it was something that seemed so esoteric and occultish and mysterious. And yeah, I mean, it has also and had a huge impact on my life also. I mean, I consider Lovecraft to be the most posthumously celebrated author of all time, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's amazing that it's a triumph of both, first off, being a fan. I mean, I'm a true fan. I'm a geek. I am proud of my geekhood. But it's amazing to me to see something that was such a part of geeky culture. That at one point you just see you see joke badges at a science fiction convention or something. That would be his lack of his culture. Now has had there's movies. There's a great outpouring. Penguin has brought out a collection of his work. I mean, these are the people that publish Faulkner and James Joyce, for Christ's sakes.
Yeah, and they're really beautiful books
too.
They're
lovely.
Yeah.
And he has there's serious literary studies, and of course, in the form of S.T. Joshi, he has a literary biographer that is obsessive and erudite at the same time. It's all because there's something in these stories and their sheer weirdness that resonates with people.
Yeah, I mean, it's the angles. It's the recognizing those types of crazy patterns and being aware of those things and like the underlying, constructs, that we see as people that are attracted to this type of thing. I mean, it's like where I'm automatically attracted to, the worm in the apple. Like I see that first. I don't see the apple, I see the worm. Or I see the incongruity in something. You know what I mean? And it's madness. It's really a reflection of that, because what I realized was that what the stories were saying was that gods were very unfeeling towards people, and that we are more or less like experiments or kind of a byproduct or something that was entertaining, instead of this idea that that existed before my mind of what a god was.
Yeah, it's this huge, sort of breakthrough moment when you generally, as you grow up, the first thing you may see, well, there are the Christians and they believe in this God that's sometimes he's loving and sometimes he's really pissed off. They got bipolar dad. Or you have atheism. That's like your first two flavors of religion in America. Then maybe you graduate out and you see some folk religion like Wicca that is so beautiful in comparison to Christianity. It has much more love and also a lot more sex. And sex is, that's a nice thing that Christianity kind of missed.
Certainly.
But with Lovecraft, there was a notion of what if the divine is really, really different And so different, not in the sense of evil, not in the sense of, oh man, I hate people. It's like, well, human life is not the divine. Human life is a long way from the divine.
Right.
But, and so he starts with these creatures that in his fantasy are seen as gods, but in his science fiction are treated as though they're super beings. They just happen to live a really long time, and they have scientific powers that are way beyond anything we understand. And people don't matter. But then he also offers this very tantalizing possibility of the sorcerer, the person who begins to gain powers and becomes more like these entities than like his fellow humans. And so in some ways, although Lovecraft himself was a complete, absolute materialist, he has a model of left-hand path practice in the form of, these sorcerous knowledge. It's hard to walk away from a metaphor like that.
Yeah. I mean, it impacted me in that manner also in the sense that I became fascinated by occultism and magic. I mean, my parents were both mystics and, magicians and that type of thing. And so there were a lot of these trappings and books and this type of stuff because they're antiques and rug dealers. So I was in this kind of environment that was very Lovecraftian. Like I'm around all these archaic, anachronistic, objects hanging out everywhere, and ancient books that seem much older because I'm so young and small, and books that are actually ancient, that type of thing. So the setting was perfect for me, much like it seems like it was perfect for you to be inspired to grow. That's what it did for me. It inspired me to know more.
Hey, Don, I'm sorry if you're not done with the train of thought.
That's fine.
I was just going to say, I've seen a lot of debate lately about H.P. Lovecraft and who some of his influences were. Who do you think they were on some level? Who do you think influenced some of his works?
Well, he has a lot of influence from, of course, Poe was the first place, right? And for all Americans, although now, growing up in public school, everybody reads Poe, and we assume, hey, this guy has always been a literary giant. Not so much. That was actually something that happened in the 20th century. But early on, Lovecraft was fascinated with Poe, and he had a lot of influence from two British writers. One of them, Arthur Machen. Arthur Machen was a member of the Golden Dawn. He had an actual interest in the practice. But Machen was interested in ecstasy. He was interested in these transcendent moments. And so all of Machen's stories, sadly, a lot of which are out of print, are about someone encountering something so religiously tremendous, it kind of blows them away, either for good or evil, but always ecstasy is the idea. He was also influenced by an Irish writer named Lord Dunsany. Now, Dunsany started this wonderful idea in his career. He says, I'm going to write a series of fantasy books, and I'm going to begin by writing the mythology of this other world. Then I'm going to write tales of heroes. Then I'm going to write human beings. It's like I'm going to create another world just as valid as the Greek world, because with the Greeks, we start with the myths, then we have the story of the heroes, and we have this philosophy about peoples. These two ideas, these three sources, Poe from America, Machen from Britain, an Irishman, Dunsany, all come together in Lovecraft. But then what's really strange about this guy, the only literary output he's got is Weird Tales magazine, which really, by and large, was a pretty crappy little pulp mag. But, and they paid just, even at the time, shockingly little money. In fact, one of the major things that led to Lovecraft's death, the guy was just actually, malnourished. He writes in his letters, that he'd worked out this system that he could manage to get by on a single day on either a can of beans or canned spaghetti, and he was living on 17 cents a day. When he developed the intestinal cancer, man, it just destroyed him. And, it's amazing. Here's this guy that has a well-read mind, yet his outlet is very small, and probably a lot of his readers were not the most sophisticated people. I was listening to the show earlier where you had this woman who was unsure whether she would appear because she's interested in, as many occultists are, the authorship of Shakespeare, and thought maybe this was not a classy enough show. Actually, people that are drawn to the paranormal, people that are drawn to the strangeness in the world, are sometimes the most intelligent. Now, some of them are very well educated. Some of them are people that, man, I can't stand formal education, so I've dropped out of that. And so they're self-educated, but you'll come across really brilliant people. Because you have to have a certain spark in you to say, I am interested in stuff that everyone is going to make fun of me for being interested in. Right. So you have to have kind of a spiritual backbone to say, yeah, I'm going to go look for Bigfoot. Because 98% of the world is going to look at you like you're an idiot. And that's a huge thing.
Most of my, I have a book out on Bigfoot I wrote with Andy Colvin, Praise for the Hairy Man, The Secret Life of Bigfoot, but most of it's filled with interviews of people about Bigfoot. My take on Bigfoot is the scene and the people involved. I go at it from an informational point of view, and plus there's a great comedy in it. So it's very interesting, the Bigfoot field, let me tell you.
Well, it's very good. First of all, you have to have this huge amount of belief.
Certain people.
And that also means that you have, that invites tricksters in. Because everybody, they love to play with that. UFOs, very similar. I used to be a close friend, although I haven't corresponded in years, and maybe he has passed, I don't know, a guy named James Mosley. That in Key West, Florida, published a magazine called Saucer Smear.
I'm familiar with him, yeah.
And
I have some of his, I have a book. I just got a book recently. It's like a bunch of those in one book.
And he would deal with the idiosyncrasies of the UFO field, which are many. Because here's a group of people that are born to be dreamers, but also they have enough going on that they're like, I can't buy into conventional reality. Conventional reality is only explaining 99% of the world. But man, all I can see is that 1% now. Of course, now that we have Fox, news, it probably explains 70% of the world. But otherwise, it used to be about 99%.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point, because I mean it is true to try to appeal to a diversified audience, because I mean you can't really take for granted like who might be listening or how it might affect them, or I mean just hearing something could change somebody's life, discovering something and moving forward with that. I mean it's important, but I mean you're right in the sense that it does take some backbone to break away from established reality, and to try to search out the paranormal and seek it out, or leave yourself open to experience it. It's the same thing with occultism, magic and anything like that. It changes your reality in a sense, and then you're changing reality yourself. So.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I mean anybody that listens to the show who regularly knows we've had a vast array of characters on the show, from Peter Levenda to Peter Moon to Jim Mars. Me personally, in written form, the people I've interviewed: Charlene Harris, the lady that inspired the whole True Blood show; Alex Gray, the artist, about Tool and the band Tool. Just so many different people. So I mean, this show is definitely an outlet for any type of topic. Pretty much, we've had so many different subjects on that I can't even keep up with them. Or it's not.
We joke around and we have fun, because that's how we do it.
How we do it.
Yeah.
So Don, I'm curious to life at the Temple of Set. Like I think about it. Like I'm from Georgia, and I've looked into the left-hand path from the show and everything, but I'm definitely no expert or anything like that. I'm always learning about it from interviews and stuff. But I'm just kind of curious, what is life like at the Temple of Set? I mean, what can you tell us about that? There's a part of it, like I've read the Satanic Bible and the Satanic Rites and all that stuff, and Anton LaVey, and I've always found it kind of creepy. But I like that kind of stuff. But there's still like a creepiness. So when I hear Temple of Set, it kind of gives me the creeps. And I'm a creepy person myself. But what is life like at the Temple of Set, like on a daily basis? What can you tell us about that without getting in trouble?
Well, I'm a former official. I can't think anyone I could get in trouble with.
Good.
The average member of the temple has a life just like everybody else. In fact, a couple of years ago, I wrote an article for Fate magazine that was called "So Your Neighbor May Practice Black Magic, but That's Okay." And which at first off I thought there's no way Fate is possibly going to touch this because they're so kind of white light oriented.
Right. Yeah, that's the truth.
But for some personal reasons, I'm a big fan of a guy named Ray Palmer, who was the editor of Amazing Magazine and who kind of started the UFO craze in America. And one of his creations was Fate magazine. And just for my own amusement,
I love
I
Fate
wanted
magazine.
to have that as a title. Like I could say, yeah, I've been in Fate. Same reason, I once wrote a story and got it in Weird Tales because that was Lovecraft, neighborhood. So I can say, yep, I was there too. The average black magician has the same goals and dreams, at least in a mundane sense, as his or her neighbor. Now, the idea of how he gets or she gets there is the first thing, and stuff that people focus on the most, is an element of antinomianism. Antinomianism means to go against the grain of society. Now, I'm not talking about anything illegal, and God knows some of our members have been so looked at by the law under a microscope. We're squeaky clean that way. But there are symbolic acts that take some guts to do. It's one thing to say, all right, I don't have anything to do with Judeo-Christianity. I've broken from the faith of my fathers. Okay. But then in ritual, can you say, yay, Satan, I really like this. Okay, now that takes an emotional moment. That's like, hey, wait a minute. Wait, I don't want to actually get, just in case, I can't say that. That antinomian moment gives us a lot of our imagery. So you look at the Temple of Set, some groups of temple, particularly, I don't know, for example, the Order of the Vampire. All right, man, you're dealing with some stuff there that's really scary to people. I'm going to consider what it might be like to, what if my life could only exist by drawing forth the attention of others, even though we live in a very vampiric world. I mean, we have vampires, they just look stupid because they're like Miley Cyrus, but they draw a lot of attention.
Right.
The things that temple members do, they read a lot. We're very bookish in one sense. They perform rituals for their own empowerment, and they're not standard. Nobody said they don't get a list like, from now you will do these things. So we're very different from, say, the Golden Dawn or the OTO, where there are there are rituals that everybody does. Instead, we teach theory of magic, and then people can perform their own magical works. You have 2 years in the temple to receive recognition. Someone in the temple has to say, yeah, this man, this woman, they need to stay. What we look for is an understanding of studying philosophy. We look for some sign of magical ability. You got a wish granted, you change something in your environment in a way that you can explain to us, and we like you. Temple membership has always been pretty small. It, however, is very diverse. We have members in the U.S., Mexico, Canada, everywhere in Western Europe, Australia, South Africa. Pretty globally, we're fairly diverse. Now, once a year, we hold an international conclave. Now, attendance is not required, but we strongly urge Setians at least once during their career to go. Now, if they go one time, we know they will go to future ones. because this is tremendously powerful to go and sit in a
Probably a lot of
room
fun.
and see all of these people like, yeah, we all do this together. So it's not just mail order occultism. It's not like, oh, this just exists, through the internet, or, I don't really know what these people might be like.
Right. It makes it more real.
It makes it more real, and also you get to see how Stedianism, feels different. The conclave in New Orleans is really different than the conclave in London. It's really different than the conclave in Munich. It's really different, than the conclave in San Francisco, which is our home base, or, Vegas, which we do pretty often because you can get cheap hotels. And you can develop some lifelong friendships. Now, I've been a member since '89. My primary initiator, the person who was my teacher for many years, Dr. Stephen Flowers, who wrote several books on runes, he is still a member. He's been a member for about 9 years longer than me. Over the years, I've gotten to be good friends with Dr. Quino and his wife. So the lifelong friendships become an important thing. But it begins with that experiment. It begins with those moments where, hey, I did this ritual, I kind of felt these emotions, or this is what happened in my life. And then watching how people practice discernment. Because you have to have both. You have both enthusiasm, man, I really want to do this shit, and discernment. You just have to say, all right, is this logical? Did this make sense? And am I exhausting all possibilities for explanation? And how do I integrate this into my life? Most occultists,
so it's a lot of self-assessment.
Yeah, because they're like, wow, it was so hard for me to get any kind of result. Now I'm not going to even consider what did this mean, or how real was this, or any of these questions about the objective world.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's important to stay grounded, especially in occultism. Or else it's very easy to delude yourself, especially if you're working on your own. Yeah, if you're not working with a group. And it's also easy to be deluded in a group, as long as you are doing a lot of self-assessments, paying attention to your initiations as they happen, and being able to objectively say, this is what I experienced, this is what I felt, this is what happened. It's a lot easier to stay truer to your experience.
Well, one thing that the temple does is that it's not unique. This is actually part of our heritage from the Church of Satan. We strongly urge our members to learn a little bit of stage magic, learn how illusions happen. And this gives you a better sense of how not to get the wool pulled over your eyes. Now, what's startling is I've actually seen, and I'm not here to badmouth other groups, so I will not be more specific, but I have actually seen a so-called Tibetan monk, and he was about as Tibetan as you or I, was giving a lecture on Tibetan Buddhism, and then did a cheap mentalist trick. But since he did it in the shape of, here's divine wisdom, this is a power that I have received through meditation, his whole audience was deeply impressed.
Right.
And man, you can see that at the Magic Castle done a lot better.
Right. It's like a cosmic whoopee cushion kind of gig.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a lot of people that want to trick you, and not necessarily just for money, or not necessarily just for sexual favors. Some people just like to trick you for the sheer joy of tricking you. Yeah,
and they boost your ego for appearing to be something that you aren't, or actually convincing someone of something that you are.
Now, the fun thing about that, when I grew up, one thing that's been a major shaping factor in my life, my mom managed a private detective firm. And early on, I got to see both people that were engaged in fraud and kind of see the personality type. And one of the things my mom showed me really early on is you could go to people who had pulled off major insurance fraud. You could tell them, hey, I'm a detective, I'm here, I'm investigating, you're not sneaking up on them at all. But just after you talk to him a while, and a little bit of rapport, all you got to say is the magic words, which are, "Man, you are so smart. How did you manage to pull that off?" And people will spill their guts without even thinking, "Hey, I'm hurting myself here," because human beings want to be recognized for doing a good trick.
Sure. You want people to know that you're smart.
You want people to know that you're smart and you enjoy a good trick. Now, this circles back on Lovecraft, because Lovecraft did one of the greatest literary hoaxes of all time. He created for his stories, he created a completely fictional book called The Necromonicon. It has no existence in reality. But by getting it mentioned in his stories, and his friends mentioned it in their stories, the belief came into being this thing must exist. And so as a consequence, various occultists...
That's what I believed
2 or 3
when I was a
copies.
kid.
Yeah. And then all those, and so you can go into any bookstore now and buy the, at least the Simon edition of it. But, I think Lovecraft would be, laughing beyond the grave to know that he caused this to happen.
Right. He really did. He made it happen.
So we have that great moment. You make the right story, and his method of writing stories, his method of fiction, he says to, potential writers, you should construct your fiction the same way you would construct a the same way you construct a hoax. You should pick all of your details so when you reach that final moment, that moment where the character encounters God, a monster, a color from outer space, they believe it because all the details have led them in that direction. And I think he does that really, really well, despite his other flaws he may have as a writer or as a human being.
Sure. I mean, just reading Lovecraft increased my vocabulary, and as a kid and as an adult, because I would sit around with the dictionary and read and find the words, that type of thing. And, it's today, I saw it starting to happen. It was probably around, the mid-2000s when, they started doing a lot of stuff in gaming with Lovecraft. In the past, before that, they had the Call of Cthulhu tabletop game, and then they, Wizards of the Coast redid that and did the D20 version to kind of get it more pumped into the genre, because, the D20 version is a lot less intimidating for people. And it really, they started building the interest there. And it's like you said earlier, it's like now there's cute little Cthulhu dolls and, and Elder Seals and, Arkham Horror and all these great things that have been born of that. And it is surprising to me how many people are aware of Cthulhu. There's been musicians, like Metallica, Call of Cthulhu, they wrote the instrumental. A bunch of different musicians and artists that have always grabbed up from Lovecraft, and you're right. It is becoming more and more real in people's minds all the time. How do you feel about Donald Tyson? Are you aware of him?
Oh yeah, no, Donald and I had been in some fiction collections together. I'm not familiar with the magical system that he derived. I know that he has one that he's derived from that. His novel,
it's pretty fascinating.
Alejandra, is a great book where he recreates.
Oh, it's awesome.
He recreates the life of Lovecraft's fictional poet Abdullah al-Hazred, and the novel is really great. That's a pretty high level of writing.
I have his tarot set. It's awesome.
I do too. Yeah, I was working with that system for a while.
Man. Creepy, I love it.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Yeah, it is a really interesting system that he's created, and he also had the companion to Al-Hazred, and it was his Necronomicon, where he kind of did the little short stories that were later elaborated on in Al-Hazred. But I think it's interesting how even Pete Carroll, Phil Hine in particular, I believe, really and chaos magicians really started focusing on Lovecraft, kind of like what I guess Aquino did with the Ritual of the Nine Angles, is they started developing these systems based off of fiction, or what people would consider fiction, and in a sense, it's what's making it more and more real all the time.
Well, there's certainly the argument that with practice, if enough kind of human minds have focused on an idea, it's easier to click into. And the reason that's true is not objectively. It's not like there's like a stock exchange somewhere, and we see this printout, Cthulhu's up 10 points today, it's down 5 points.
Invest in Lovecraft.
Right. But it depends on how much enthusiasm you can bring to this.
Right.
Phil Hine and I have sort of corresponded for years, and he even was nice enough to quote me in one of his works, and I have done the same for him. Phil points out that Lovecraft, if you can allow yourself to put aside, your rational mind for a night and see what fear is, and then step beyond that, you reach a really interesting place. And it's just like sex magic. Sex magic doesn't work in that moment of the height of desire. It's 5 feet beyond the height of desire.
Right.
It's not orgasm. It's what comes to your mind after orgasm.
The lightning flash.
What comes on.
Oh, you sound like you know the way and the magic of the taint.
Yeah, like...
hey, Don, we had Donald Michael Craig on before. God rest his soul, he passed away, and he was telling
I love that guy.
Sex magic and the power of the taint and gooch. And man, I was about to freaking cry. I was laughing so hard.
Yeah, he was talking about prolonging the orgasm by pressing on the perineum, I believe, to stop the ejaculation. And that was a great interview, also.
It was funny. Someone in the chat room said that Don was twisting off the heads of kittens as he was talking to us. And of course, that's not true. But
I'm sure.
I had to bite. I thought I was going to bust out laughing right there in the interview.
Right.
Jerk off. No, he's not. Well, we're about to go on break, and but yeah, I mean, that's like I was saying with the creepy thing. Just the stigma of just mentioning Church of Satan or Temple of Set. It just gives us like it takes you to this horror movie vibe like instantly, which I know is off base, off the beaten path, but just something about it does that. I guess because of movies and all that crap.
Yeah. I've always been a friend to the devil.
Yeah, again, but that's a useful launching place as long as you don't realize, you don't think of that as the destination. But if you think of it as a launching place, that's fine. I can start with the creepy, but I need to eventually move to the sublime. Because that way you move beyond just your day-to-day world really quickly.
Right. And that's how we transform, Yeah. I mean, it's,
sorry, my dog ran out back. He's not supposed to. Will you go get him?
Okay.
Ran out back. Sorry, my dog goes in the backyard, and there's something out there he's getting high on. Like he eats the grass, and he comes inside, and he's like a crackhead. Like he's breathing heavy, and it's like he smoked crack out in the backyard. So he's on restriction back there because he has seizures too sometimes. He ran out there really quick. I had to get my nephew to get him because he's on restriction. He can't. I don't know what he's doing, but man, there's something. I need to find out what it is because he's getting tortured.
You gonna get into that later?
Yeah. I don't know what it is, but all right, we're about to go on break, and we'll be back for the other 50 minutes of the show.
Awesome.
And I really enjoyed it. Love talking about Lovecraft and this stuff. Love it a whole lot. Do you have a website or anything, Don?
I don't currently. Of course, the Temple of Set does have a website, and then the people that just brought out my book, the publishers of fine Lovecraftian fiction, Hippocampus Press, and of course you can always find my stuff on Amazon.
All right. Well, we're going to take about an 8-minute break, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Thanks for listening, everybody.
The Church of Mabus. Into the light. That may be. You have to see. Metaphysical. The dark side.
Haunted houses, I like houses, anything horror, all of it. Oh yeah, me like it. You mean I could go mad? I'm shaking.
The Church of Mabus.
I'm stoked. I'm ready. This is awesome.
Welcome back to the Church of Mabus radio show. Give you a quick glimpse into our upcoming guests, and then we'll get back to Don Webb. Like I said, next Friday is Devora Thunderbeat. We're going to be talking UFOs. And September 5th is Alan. That's going to be, the echo should even out. That's going to be September 5th's Alan Bakken. That's going to be Induced Afterlife Experience. Basically, he's a doctor who induces people in some kind of hypnosis, I guess, and afterlife stuff, so some Frankenstein kind of stuff, because that's how we roll here at the Church of Mabus radio show. Frankenstein. Oh yeah, September 12th is Matt Swain. We're going to be talking about haunted rock and roll, like ghost stories and all that stuff. September 19th, Brent Raines, UFOs and stuff, and shamanism, and he's a wide plethora of topics. September 26th, Ted Peters. That's some ancient aliens and stuff like that. And then quickly with October, and then I'll stop, Denise Alvarado, Voodoo. Sarah Christensen Fu on October 10th, Bad Astrology. So basically she wrote some books about astrology, and it's kind of this witty, dark kind of view on it. It's pretty good. Dennis Waller, October 17th, Alaskan Bigfoot. God, what is it? I always have trouble saying his last name. October 24th, Lon Miletto, Encyclopedia of Evil. I think I said his last name wrong. I only have Lon there, so I need to fix that. But Encyclopedia of Evil, I think it's Miletto, Lon Miletto. Encyclopedia of Evil, and that's from Redweiser Books. That'll be our Halloween show, the Encyclopedia of Occult Evil. So, all right, Don, are you there?
I'm here.
Alrighty. Well, I've interviewed E.R. Werner before. That's Corvus Nocturnum. on Satanism, and I know he's I think the PR guy for Church of Satan. I don't know if he still is or not, but people from the left-hand path or Satanism or Temple of Set, you're always so likable. That's kind of creepy too. Corvus, he's so nice. He's like, let's talk about the Church of Satan. He's like the coolest, nicest person ever. But I'm kind of curious to the perspective on that. Is that is Satanism, for example, Anton LaVey? I mean, basically, do you think it was created just for the complete shock rock of it, just to rebel against Christianity? What do you think the creation, the origin's story is on that?
Well, I think with Anton, you have this guy who sees the hypocrisy of society, and also saw that the people that were necessarily in opposition to society had the same kind of hang-ups, because the Church of Satan is a tremendously 60s creation. I mean, this is 1966, San Francisco. The Church of Satan is alive and well and doing great during the Summer of Love. So you've got, on one hand, this entire spiritual outreach of people, taking LSD, putting flowers in their hair, dropping out of society. And on the other hand, at the same time, and part of the same spiritual movement, it's the opposite side of the same coin, you have someone saying, hey, I'm going to reject that. I'm going to say the self is the one thing I can trust. I can't trust anything else. I am going to actively, as an aesthetic choice, choose darkness, choose the color black as something to wear, choose a notion of enlightened selfishness. Now, Anton, whose views, if you look at what he wrote, it kind of changed during his lifetime, but he was never particularly a believer. If you look at Church of Satan documents during its first 9 years or so, he thought of Satan as an external force in nature. And then toward the later part of his life, he was a simple atheist that loved the aesthetic. Now, he did see that human beings needed certain things. And although Satanism is definitely a break away from Satanism, we have very different views on a lot of issues, he had two really important observations. The first was human beings need ritual. It's a need that we have. It's how we structure our lives. Now, after Anton said that, there are any number of reputable anthropological studies, psychological studies that say, yeah, this guy was right. They don't cite him, of course, because that would be, academic suicide. The other thing he said is he said that desire is what creates all meaning ultimately. What you want in life. Now, this does not mean you have to be a selfish, idiotic, I hate everyone, misanthropic person. Your desire can be for social justice, but you got to say at some level, I know this is my desire. I know this isn't just God told me to do this. And then if you find that desire, it's a source of power. In many ways, everything we saw in the 70s and the whole me generation and that whole kind of thing that maybe even brought Ronald Reagan into power, very clearly the same vibe as the Church of Satan, but it would rather cloak itself in Christianity and rather cloak itself in movements that say, this looks good to me. Satanism begins with a lot of honesty of the self. Satanism, as opposed to Satanism, has certain other beliefs. We believe that there is a part of you that is immortal. We believe there's a part of you that can be enhanced, contacted, sensed through magical means. And we're not dogmatic about it. We don't know what the heck this means. This actually is based on our experience. Now, in many ways, we are probably more like ancient Gnostics than we are like current Satanists. But we have to come from that same place of radical self-knowledge, radical acceptance of the self, and we say exactly the opposite of the Buddha, who's the best speaker for the right-hand path, says desire is bad. We who speak for the left-hand path say desire is good. It is the fundamental part of human life. Everybody wants something, and if you discover what your real wants are, and get them, that is an experience of the divine. If I want to know what it's like to be God, it could start as something as simple as, man, all day long I really wanted a chocolate milkshake, and then when I get off work, I go to the place in town that has the best chocolate milkshake, and I really savor it. If you take that as this is a mirror of godhood, just as much as, I don't know, lighting candles at midnight mass, then you're dealing with the one thing you got access to, which is yourself. That's the one thing you're always going to have. The desire for the milkshake, though, is probably not where you want to end your quest, because it's going to be really hard to get those milkshakes after you die. But taking that desire and putting it onto whatever you see as cosmic truth, pursuing the mysteries that you see as manifest through history, that's a good place. That's a good place to focus on. But that's just our theory. Here's the difference between us and conventional religion. We admit it's a theory. We say, yeah, this is our best guess right now, and this is the best technology we got right now. And also, we just take $80 a year instead of 10% of your, lively income.
Hey, is Beazle, are you still here? Hello, Beazle. Oh, no. I thought he was gone. And our producer, Joe, went to go get a pizza, so that's not good. He got dropped. Let me find him on Facebook. And I'm sure he's trying to communicate with me there. And I'll have to tell him that really sucks. But hopefully Joe will be back soon and add him to the conversation. Well, I guess, Don, what other horror books have you written? Tell us about some of your other titles.
Well, there's two things I'd like to talk about. I have written, I wrote a series of mysteries for St. Martin's Press, and although they're currently all out of print, that means you go to Amazon and get them for relatively small amounts of money, which is a fun thing. Some years ago, I wrote 4 occult books for a press in Texas called Runa Raven. Runa Raven Press went out of business, and all of those titles have become amazingly expensive. I actually saw some of the paperbacks I had written for sale on Amazon for $250 a pop. The good news for people who are looking for any of my occult titles, there's a new press called Lodestone Press. It's also here in Central Texas, and it's going to release my 3 occult titles. Uncle Setnock's Essential Guide to the Left-Hand Path, Mysteries of the Temple of Set, and the 7 Faces of Darkness. Mysteries of the Temple of Set has just come out. Lodestone Press doesn't have a working website right now, and just on sheer rumor, they've sold like 20 copies of the book, and they haven't even made an announcement yet. The guy was just like, how did they even find out? And I said, I didn't know it was out yet. So if you're looking for what to buy people, that perfect gift for Halloween, all of my older occult titles will soon be remanifesting. When they show up, I'll stick a notice, if that's okay, on your Facebook page to help people find it. This will be, I think, a big benefit to left-hand path thinking. Of course, my last nonfiction book, Overthrowing the Old Gods, is selling well from Inner Traditions. You guys were so nice as to have me on as an interview for that. And certainly my interview there, I know, drove some sales. So this is a really good place. Again, you might tell that author, it's like, I don't know if this is the right place for me. I tell you one thing, you have, your readers follow up, or your listeners follow up on things. You're a really nice show that way. I have some occult fiction coming out in various places. There's a book coming out called A Dark Fantastique, as it says in the title. major collections coming out of new horror fiction from a lot of people that Jason V. Brock has edited. That's going to be a wonderful book because it actually has in it the last story Ray Bradbury ever wrote. So that's a real moment. And of course, to me, in some ways, this is fulfillment of a life fantasy that I'm sharing covers with Ray Bradbury since, I don't know, I was reading Ray Bradbury since I could read.
What do you know about Robert Howard and H.P. Lovecraft conversing? There's a movie, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it's called The Whole Wide World. For some reason, I thought about it when we were talking about Lovecraft, and I pulled it up on IMDb. It's got Vincent D'Onofrio and Renee Zellweger in it, and it's a story. It's a pretty unique gem. If you haven't seen it, definitely.
Oh no, that is an absolutely wonderful, beautiful movie. It's so
it really is good. And there's parts in it when he says he's conversing with H.P. Lovecraft. And it's for those in our audience, Robert Howard, if you don't know, is Conan, did all the Conan books. And the movie's definitely a trip out. Like, he just goes crazy pretty much. And it's supposed to be based on some book she wrote or something like that. I've never read the book. But do you know anything about them conversing or anything?
I do. Robert Howard, of course, was a Texan. He lived in Cross Plains, Texas. And even though he wrote for Weird Tales magazine, which paid a penny a word, he was the richest person in Cross Plains during the Depression. So I've got to tell you, one, how much he wrote, and two, how poor that part of Texas was. Now, Robert Howard, in his creation of Conan, early on, he wrote Weird Tales magazine, and the first time he wrote to Lovecraft had made a linguistic error in a story called The Rats in the Walls. And Howard, being the young geek that he was, wrote a long letter to Lovecraft explaining the error and said, this is totally wrong. And in those days, Weird Tales loved to put letters where people fought each other. Much as we have flame wars on the internet now, back in the day, of course, you had it as part of the letter column. Lovecraft, being the gentleman that he was, wrote back, praising Howard for his scholarship. And these two, plus a California-based horror writer named Clark Ashton Smith, these three guys were called the Three Musketeers of Weird Tales. And early on, they started doing this thing that changed fiction. They would put each other's characters, monsters, gods, and forbidden books in each other's stories. So one day, you're reading a story by Clark Ashton Smith that it makes reference to the Necromonicon, and the next day you're reading a story by this Texan, Robert E. Howard. It mentions the Necromonicon. So for the Weird Tales reader, they're thinking, hey, this stuff's real. Look, this showed up in 3 different stories from different people. Howard was a tragic figure. He had a hard time relating to women, as you saw in The Whole Wide World.
Yeah.
But the person who began all of that, his girlfriend in the movie, Noveline Price, here's her story. She became an English teacher. She moved to the city of New Orleans. She would give a lecture every year that anybody can be anything. And she would always say, even in this little town in Texas where I once was, there was someone that wanted to be a writer, and he became a writer. His name was Robert Howard. She would tell the story of, knowing him. And then what happened toward the end of her life, one of her students said, you mean like this? And pulls out a copy of Conan stories. And she gasps. Here, oh my God, this person whom she knew, who was writing for this rinky-dink little pulp magazine, just like Lovecraft, suddenly appeals to a huge public. And of course, for Conan, we got the movies with, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I know there's a new Conan movie that's coming into being. I don't know the dates on that.
Yeah, Legend of Conan. I read something about it on IGN.com that they're saying the story is similar to Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven. So I guess Conan's like old and retired and has to come out of retirement. So
well,
yeah, I hope that's good. I pray that's good. I hope they don't screw that up, which is highly possible.
And Robert Howard, his home in Texas, in Cross Plains, Texas, has been rebuilt by fans. I contributed stuff for them to sell and auction like every other Texas writer, so we could see this come into being. The first time I saw the whole wide world, I was in Los Angeles, and I actually went and saw that with Zena LeVay, Anton's daughter,
Wow.
and her husband Nicholas Schreck, and so the three of us were all sitting in the audience. And by the end of the movie, every one of us, our shirts or blouses were wet with tears.
Wow, that's so cool that you saw it with her. That's pretty awesome.
And so,
sure.
We later parted ways spiritually. And I think that they have a few less than kind things to say about me, but that was a moment where we all, it was just so big because we all knew, of course, the story. We all knew that he killed himself. But then as the movie's unfolding, they make such an evocation of this man, and you see him in, the power of dreaming to such a huge level. I mean, this guy's living in a podunk town in the Depression. The biggest thing he ever did was make a trip to San Antonio. That's it. That's the height of his whole movement in the world, and yet he dreams up the figure of Conan and the figure of Red Sonja, and he started writing at the end of his life a history of Texas that never was finished. It's a huge and powerful thing. And there are now, of course, people just like, Lovecraft has S.T. Joshi being his biographer. Howard has a man named Mark Finn who lives in Vernon, Texas, who's written a great biography of him. These people, by sheer power of dreaming, have developed a form of immortality. They are magicians. They never any time in their life grabbed a wand or chanted a weird word or chalked something on the floor. But they are magicians because their dreams live on, and because of their dreams, they are remembered. This is a huge thing. It's also true. There was the three of the guys. It was Lovecraft, Robert Howard, and Clark Ashton Smith. They're all worth reading, in different ways. They wrote really different kinds of fiction, but they decided among letters, among themselves, they're going to perpetuate the hoax of Lovecraft's gods. And so this is why, to the Weird Tales reader, man, this stuff's starting seeming really real. Because, it's weird. You read H.P. Lovecraft, he's talking about Cthulhu. Then you're reading a Conan story, and there's a mention of some old god named Cthulhu. And you're like, wait a minute, isn't that the same thing? And then you're reading some story by Clark Ashton Smith, and sure enough, there's just a really brief, 2 lines mentioning Cthulhu in a story called Return of the Sorcerer. And it conjured into being certain things, not just certain images, but also we remember the guys. These guys in their lifetime had squat for money. Lovecraft, one of the reasons he died, malnutrition. Robert E. Howard killed himself the day his mom died because he just thought, man, my mother is everything, totally dominated by his mom in various ways. Clark Ashton Smith lived in a tiny cabin in in California, and only at the very end of his life, in the late 60s, he did marry a woman who kind of got his life, kind of elevated it from just total poverty. Now, there is a connection between these things and LaVey. Clark Ashton Smith, when he would come to San Francisco, would hang out with the man who later would call himself Anton LaVey. In those days, he was just Howard Stanton Levy, but he was a great fan of weird fiction, and so he hung out with people like Clark Ashton Smith and the late Fritz Leiber. because he loved this stuff, and that gave him a lot of his own aesthetic. It's not, the Church of Satan does not come from traditional occult roots. Anton wasn't the initiate of some existing society. He apparently went a couple of times to an OTO gathering and just saw the OTO Gnostic Mass, and he liked that whole naked woman on the altar thing. That sounds good. But he was not an occultist in that sense. He was an occultist in the sense of, my dreams are more important than consensual reality. I want to spend time with my mind, my heart, and those closest to me. And by making just that choice, this man, in the case of Anton, again, by sheer force of desire, attracted other people. I mean, Anton LaVey was, after all, on the Tonight Show one year, blessing Johnny Carson at the beginning of the year.
Really? That's bizarre. Really? That's awesome.
Nowadays that wouldn't happen. There's not going to be a day where Church of Satan, certainly not us, is going to be invited to some major show and say, hey, can you bless us for the year? Because, as we know, in the 90s, there was that moment of the satanic panic where people began to be confused between movies and the real world. And we just, in some ways, the population is less discerning than it used to be. So you can have, people like Geraldo Rivera and his stupid Satanism in America show, and people be really worried there's a great satanic cult. Yeah, not so much. But it's a great story. It's a scary story, but it's that same story that you can tell somebody about the Claw or some other urban folklore.
The Claw?
Well, haven't you heard that when you, at some point when you were growing up, someone told you this story. The story was that there was a young couple and they're making out, and then they hear over the radio that a man who has a claw for one arm has escaped from the insane asylum. And
I've heard that in a horror movie or something. I know I've heard that story in a horror movie, around a campfire or something like that.
It's a great urban legend. It's a wonderful story and exists in various. Unfortunately, for a brief time in America, urban folklore and rational thought about people and alternative religions kind of collided. So, you had a lot of, what we call the satanic panic, where people were, calling their police saying, I know there's a great satanic cult out there. Fortunately, that subsided because, after all, we were strongly looked at by law enforcement. And they said, we can't really figure you guys out because you sure read a lot of books and things, but, you're not a threat to us. So we're moving on.
My first experience with Satanism was these kids would talk about, there was this place where in the woods, and there used to be some kind of building out there or mental institute or something, and they would say that there were waterheads out there, which I guess is a term for mental patients. From I think of movies that with experimentations and stuff like that, like American Horror Story with the Nazi doctor and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But we would go out there in our cars, and there was supposedly a bridge or something in Georgia, and if your car would stop or something. But the story was that there were waterheads that lived out in the woods, and they would come and get you, and they were Satanists. And I was a young kid, a fat kid in junior high, and would go out there, and that was my first experience besides horror movies with Satanism on any level. And of course, later I came across Anton LaVey and read all his stuff. But it's a pretty funny story. For some reason, I'm remembering it out of the blue. But yeah, I just talked to Beazle, and he's apologizing for not being here, but it's not really his fault. Hopefully Joe will bring him back as soon as he comes back. Our producer, Joe, told me right after our break that he went to go get a pizza real quick. So, well, hopefully he'll be back soon and bring Beazle back to the conversation. But So when it comes to H.P. Lovecraft, I'm familiar with the stories, of course, and the films. And a lot of the films, for some reason, are really terrible, but they're still fun to watch. And there's some good ones out there. But I know Guillermo del Toro, the guy that did Hellboy and Pacific Rim, and a television show, The Strain on FX, he's fighting to do Into the Mountains of Madness. And for some reason he wants Tom Cruise to star in it, which I don't know if that's a good thing with Tom Cruise's recent Scientology psychosis, but that's one of the reasons it got delayed, because he's fighting for Tom Cruise to be in it. But I think it'd be pretty interesting if he does actually do it, because I enjoy his stuff, like Hellboy and all that stuff.
Well, I think there's some potential there. Yeah, of course, that rumor's gone around for a long time, and Guillermo del Toro has even commented that he wants to do the Mountains of Madness. And I mean, this is the guy that did Pan's Labyrinth, which in many ways, although of course not by Lovecraft, but it's a very Lovecraftian idea. You know, the idea of this young girl, and in order to escape the horrors of, you know, fascism, she begins to encounter these dream beings and crosses into this very strange and monstrous world. But even though it's strange and monstrous, it's so much better than fascist Spain. It's so much better to say, all right, I'm going to go, you know, into the earth and meet a creature that has eyeballs in the middle of its hands. Okay, that's better than actually seeing people being tortured by a fascist regime. You know, evil can mean two very different things. It can be this horrible stupidity that humans will do on other humans, or there's an idea of cosmic evil, the idea of someone that's revolting against the laws of the universe. You know, I mean, there's so many laws that bind us that I would like to revolt against. Not that big on the law of gravity. I would like to fly. And because human beings want to revolt that way, of course, we get Oscar and, you know, Wilbur Wright, and they do their flying thing. But I still want to fly like I fly in dreams. This is the beginning of cosmic rebellion. You know, the rebellion of, I just want to, you know, irritate people, or I want to go against society. That's a good beginning. That's a nice place to start. But what you really want for the left-hand path is this deep cosmic want, this desire to rebel against the galling laws of space and time. And of course, for Lovecraft, all of his monsters/gods do this in some extent. I mean, look at Great Cthulhu. Great Cthulhu does not die. He has to sleep for long periods. And by long periods, we're talking billions of years. Then he reawakens. He moves from planet to planet. He communicates through dreams. Man, that's a lot more interesting than Lovecraft's life at that time, which is living through Depression-era America.
Yeah, he's... Did you ever see that quote by Lovecraft about Republicans? It's pretty funny. He tears into Republicans, and it's weird because I can look it up if I need to. It'll take a minute to find it, but he tears into Republicans, and it's during his era and time. And what's so weird is it's describing them how they are exactly now. It's a pretty interesting quote. Have you ever seen it?
Yeah, no, because this represents exactly what he hated. Now, he began his career being considerably right-wing, you know, and he went through a process that by the end of his life, he was an active supporter of Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, because he saw this as being hopeful. Now, a lot of people, and there's a lot of ink being spilled right now in the writerly community, really disliked Lovecraft because he was a racist. He was a tremendous racist at his time. You know, and a lot of people now are like, well, we shouldn't like his fiction. And I think it's really a bad idea to choose a writer on the basis of their beliefs. I mean, one of my
Yeah,
favorite writers is...
I was actually thinking about that earlier, at that thing with H.P. Lovecraft, everybody saying he's racist and all that stuff. It reminds me of the era, I don't know the exact years if they match with Lovecraft's, but that movie by Martin Scorsese, Gangs in New York, everybody's like racist in that movie. And it kind of reminded me, it's just the way it is, you know. It's back then, not to say it's correct or right, but that's what it reminded me of. It's like... Daniel Day-Lewis, you know, the guy with the top hat and all that. I can't remember his name in the movie, but they're all racist as hell, and that's just the way it was back then. And hell, that's pretty much the way it is now on some levels, unfortunately. So,
well, yeah, you can't pick a writer on the basis of their beliefs or their... You pick a writer on how good their fiction is. And then you shouldn't be lured into their beliefs because they've got... You know, let's look at William... One of my favorite writers in the world is William Burroughs. Okay, this guy shot his wife. I mean, in terms of just like, you know, what's a reprehensible human being?
I didn't know he shot
his wife.
Did he kill her?
Oh, yeah. You know.
Oh, I didn't know that. Did he go to prison for it?
No, he managed, first off, because he was the heir to the Burroughs fortune, and Burroughs were the people that invented the adding machine. He managed to buy that off, and so he spent years outside the country. Of course, you know, he was a heroin-using homosexual. You know, in terms of like the person you really don't want to have living next to you is somebody that gets high and shoots off guns randomly. You know, and is always trying to seduce young boys. He's like the worst possible neighbor. But his fiction is wonderful. And very much like Lovecraft, there's something very similar. He can look at society with this eye for the complete outsider and describe what's going on. And Naked Lunch might be the great American novel, and it's a great send-up of everything about American politics.
That's where I got introduced into William Burroughs, is that movie with Peter Weller, and then I bought the book. The movie's pretty damn good, too. Pretty good, pretty damn good, for sure.
Well, it's like Cronenberg, and of course, you know, Cronenberg is himself, you know, significantly an outsider. And, you know, so his movies are, you know, sort of transcendently wonderful because he's not starting from the same place as, I don't know, 95% of his audience. You know, and he's presenting reality as he sees it. Now, I don't mean he sees, you know, the horrible creatures we would see in, I don't know, any of his films, Videodrome, for example, but he sees the horrors of society and has no problem holding up a mirror to that. You know, kind of a funhouse mirror. It distorts things a little bit, but definitely it's a mirror.
Yeah, David Cronenberg, his movies are just excellent. Like, they're definitely great. I think his son did a movie recently. Yeah, Antiviral. Have you heard of that?
I have heard of it, but I have not seen it.
Pretty messed up.
That's the one about the viruses that belong to celebrities, right? People that want to have the same sickness as their celebrities. Or maybe there's something else. Never mind.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I've read about it but not seen it.
It's definitely worth the watch, but it's very disturbing for sure. One thing I wanted to ask you about is Crowley, and there's some connection with the Loki Trickster Archetype. I have a connection with Coyote, which is the Native American trickster, and it started a long time ago. I came across a book by D.J. Conway, and there's a chant in there to the Coyote, and it's I think it's Trickster, Shape Changer, keep me from danger, cunning magician, show me your ways of magical fire, powers much higher, lead me to new life, brighten my days. And since I've said that many years ago, I've kind of got addicted to it. When I get in a bind, I'll say it. It's kind of like my little superhero chant. but there's I have this quilt that two Native American tribes, Alta Dillard, a guest who's been on the show about UFO contactee stuff, and her and another woman from two different Native American tribes made me a coyote like a quilt. It's on my wall. It's very beautiful. And I love those coyote stories, you know, from Native American folklore. Like I collect those books and stuff like that. Like, the stories are really weird. Stuff like Coyote lost his anus to Beaver Woman or something. They're just bizarre. But I'm kind of curious if you could get into the Crowley Loki trickster archetype and all that. I find that fascinating, that the trickster stories and Norse stuff. I've recently got a hold of the Norse mythology after binge watching Vikings. I've always been interested in that stuff, but for some reason that show Vikings kind of triggered it again. But what do you think about Crowley and the Loki trickster archetype and all that?
Well, of all the faces of the Prince of Darkness, that face is a trickster, whether it's Coyote for many of the Native Americans, including the Chickasaw. My father actually had tribal papers, so it's not a far leap for me. Or Loki for the Norse. The trickster reminds you that it's all about process, and that nothing is necessarily that easy, and you better be able, above anything else, to laugh.
Yeah.
Now, when you begin to work with these principles, or you attract them to you magically, and clearly you're willing to do that. You just uttered an invocation into radio. I mean, now the entire universe is suddenly looking at you right now. Coyote is going to meet you tonight because you called. If you call, they'll show up. When you invoke this, it always shows you the strength. It does not show you the easy or the clear path, but it shows you the path. I have a friend who recently, he was very upset with the job that he had, could not stand it. You know, and so he's not normally a magician. He asked me about, how do you invoke like these evil principles? I said, maybe you don't want to do that because that takes a lot of thought and you have to pretty well integrated life. But of course, anybody, when they start magic, they just plunge in. That's what we do. That's what makes us magicians. So he did his invocation to Lord Loki, and he called Loki because he thought Loki is going to really screw up his boss. That was his big hope. 2 weeks later, he gets a spot audit of what he's doing in his own job from a boss that totally hates him. The boss fires him. Almost immediately, he is out of work. And his first thought is, oh, my God, I'm being punished. The gods are punishing me. And he called me up, and he told me, he's all sobbing. And I said, no. I said, look, I said, now you're on the roller coaster. You wanted to go on the roller coaster. You chose a roller coaster god because that's what the trickster will do. Well, within 3 months, he got his dream job. He got the job he's wanted for years. But I can tell you one thing, if he was still employed at the crappy place he used to work, he would have never had the guts to get the resume together, get his life straightened up, go out, hit the pavement, do the research, and find the job. So magically, a complete success. Absolutely. Trickster at his best. I want a new job. First step, I got fired. Oh, my God. This is Trickster working in a big way. Now, Crowley himself, as he progressed, as he became less subject to the laws of humans, became quite the trickster figure. He would interact with people, their lives would sometimes go to complete shit, and then on the other side of things, they would appear in a better place. He oftentimes would find himself in the most ridiculous situations. He's a guy that at one point in his life, he made a magical ring out of platinum, which he consecrated. At several times in his life, he also had to sell it at a pawn shop. And then, he would get his life back together, buy it back. Being a magician is never an easy life. Now, Setians who deal with this archetype all the time, because the oldest known form of the Prince of Darkness, at least in terms of having being written down, is Set. The Egyptians were aware of Set 5,000 years ago. And there was always followers of Set, even though he was the guy that throws you the curveball. If you're going to go through chaos, if you're willing to say, okay, I'm going to let chaos into my life because I have to reformulate things, you got to be ready for anything to happen. Most people do not understand this because most people's idea of magic is something like watching Bewitched, right? They'll twitch their nose, and a great thing will happen. Magic is often catastrophic. Magic can oftentimes completely knock you off the floor. But if you're alert and you remember why you started it, you will get to go where you want to go. That's the difference between the Prince of Darkness as an archetype, whether we call him Coyote, whether we call him by a female name like Hecate, call him by a Norse name like Loki, call him by an Egyptian name like Set. That's the difference between that and the gods of monotheism. The god of monotheism who says, I created the whole universe, and I am in control all the time, and you better straighten up.
Nice.
Trickster gods always say, sometimes you got to take a risk. Sometimes bad things will happen. Here's the only things I want with you. Stay focused on what you want and be able to laugh at yourselves. If you couldn't laugh at yourself and you deal with Coyote, you're in deep shit, because Coyote will not let you go until you have a good laugh. He'll help you find whatever you want, but along the way, at one point, you're going to be sitting on your butt because you're knocked over, and you had better laugh at yourself, because if not, he'll knock you on your butt a few more times.
Yeah.
Now, of course, when I say that, I do not mean that there's an external entity. This is actually part of your own soul doing this, but it corresponds to an older external entity that maybe at some point you'll be able to get that entity's attention. So you better be in a good place when you do.
Definitely. I have a question from Wham. She interviewed you the first time you were here, and her question is, in very general ways, without revealing secrets, the kind of rituals that might be done with Lovecraft materials to counter all the Necronomicon stuff. That's the Simon Necronomicon. Mm-hmm. Anything you can add about that? I'm not sure.
Well, if you wanted to deal with that and use something that's already printed, I would get a copy of the Satanic Bible, the two Lovecraftian rituals, and they were written by Aquino. I would do the Ceremony of the Nine Angles. For one thing, it's a lot of fun, and two, it begins with this notion that you're looking at what we call an angular time process. Now, it was Frank Belknap Long who produced this idea of angular time, and he created it for a story he wrote that Lovecraft helped him write called The Hounds of Tyndalus. Circular time is a time that we have all the time. Everything follows the same pattern. Spring always comes after winter. Summer always comes after spring. College comes after high school. Everything in most humans' lives is circular time. We live through circular time. Angular time is the time of your deepest desires and your truest self. And it can go through huge changes. But from the outside, you look the same. Every one of your listeners has had an experience of angular time. You yourself have had it when you've had that moment where suddenly you have changed your mind in a deep way about the universe, or changed your mind in a deep way about what you want to do. And it can happen anytime. You can be driving to work, and suddenly you have some realization about, hey, I have to change this in my family. I have to change this in myself. I want something really different. Angular time is very frightening because it means everything else in your life now looks different. Now, from the outside, you look exactly like the same guy you were 15 minutes ago. But inside, you've had this huge change. As opposed to this beautiful sweeping spiral of your life unfolding, suddenly you've taken a huge change in a different direction. It's why the number one symbol for the left-hand path is the pentagram with 2 points raised. It's about the fact in human life we can make these big changes, but we still enclose ourselves, just as someone in the right-hand path might have a spiral or a circle or any of these gentle figures. We know sometimes radical change has to happen, and sometimes that's who you really know who you are. And radical change scares the hell out of everybody around you. Maybe you have a friend who all his life has been a straight man, and then one day he realizes, hey, that's not the way I really am. We're frightened when he comes out. When he suddenly says, no, really, I'm gay. Man, we all stop, like, oh my God, how long has that gone on? Why did you make this decision? By making this big change on the inside, he has undergone angular time. He has broken from all the circles and spirals of his life. Now, the Lovecraftian deities, Lovecraft likes to see his deities as moving through angled space, making radical changes. When he wrote his story, The Call of Cthulhu, Cthulhu's home city rises from the sea, Aurelia. Aurelia is full of these angled buildings that people go crazy just walking on them because they think they know the way the angles work, but actually they're different. A different geometry was a scary idea to a rational mind like Lovecraft. Now, if you personally want to achieve some notion of what these creatures are like, here's what I would suggest. Go to some place in your home city that's a little scary to you. Maybe it's a slightly bad neighborhood. Maybe it's a place where there was an industrial accident sometime. Go there at twilight. Now, don't risk your life. Don't do anything stupid. But just take a long wandering walk. Anytime it occurs to you to turn in a different direction, do so. And in your mind, simply invoke. I would invoke the messenger, Naralatasep, and to say, I want to know something about myself. Sometime during your walk, or maybe your drive, if you're not brave enough to get out of your car, you will see something that will radically put together a previous memory from long ago and a desire that you have suppressed in some way. Now, it's not going to be a sexual, it's like, whoa, yeah, I get it now. This is desire. I mean desire like, you know, at one time in my life, I really wanted to be a doctor or a librarian or a professional wrestler or firefighter. How did I become what I've become? And at that moment, that very alien moment, realize you are the alien. You're the one that brought yourself to this strange place. You're the one that had that desire. You had that memory. And that alien aspect is saying you have put aside, you have forgotten, you've walked away from, hey, that is really you. Maybe that's even more you in your day-to-day world. And in the moment you have that, just say a wish out loud in the name of Naralatasep. In the name of Naralatasep, I wish to know more about myself. In the name of Naralatasep, I wish to have greater wealth. I wish to have a job that lets me have artistic expression. Say it out loud. Don't be embarrassed, ashamed. Don't be inhibited. And then go back. Get back in your day-to-day reality. Do everything you can to forget what you've just done.
Nice. Whose name were you invoking again? What deity? Are you still there? Oh, hell.
Hello?
Hey, Don?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, we dropped. We're having a lot of trickster antics tonight with the beetle thing and all that. I'm so used to
I was describing this like whole ritual sequence, and suddenly I thought, wait a minute, wow, there's nobody there. Okay.
Welcome to the void.
You called up Coyote, I called up Naralatasep, and suddenly the system goes down. Yeah, what a surprise.
Yeah, anytime I brought up Coyote, that's usually crap happens, just like that. But yeah, we're at the end of the show, and of course, the Beazle thing happened. He got dropped a long time ago, but he's cool with it. And this is your second appearance. I really enjoy it. Definitely one of my favorite guests. I love the deep subject matters, and the trickster stuff is always winning for me. So we really appreciate it. And that's Don Webb's new book is Through Dark Angles. trying to read the works inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. I have it right here in front of my face. It's just dark in here. What is the website address for the publisher?
It's Hippocampus Press, but it's just the easiest way. Go to Amazon.com, type in Don Webb, or type in Don Webb through Dark Angles. It will come up. It was just released officially last week, and I think people are going to really enjoy it. You obviously don't have to be an occultist to read this. This is just fiction. It's good fiction. Some of it's funny. Some of it's scary. And for those people who have that kind of interest, maybe it's fiction that points at something else. But it wasn't written for that. It's not religious fiction. It's just religion. It's just fiction written in the good old American tradition of trying to scare people.
There's definitely anything H.P. Lovecraft that connects to him on any level automatically becomes otherworldly on some level, and you've definitely embodied that. I appreciate it, Don, and definitely have to have you on again sometime. Thanks for doing the show, and everybody, thanks for listening, and have a good weekend.
Thank you so much. You have a great weekend, and I hope Coyote brings you something interesting.